For the event today, we decided to switch to another platform, but experience has proven probably Blackboard Collaborate is one of the most stable platforms. We struggled to get it live on a previous environment. The team is still trying to figure it. We are working with an external company in order to make it working. But in the meantime, I really appreciate your flexibility, as always, as our clients and prospects, in order to switch to a new platform. And we will use Collaborate, at least for now, in order to kick it off. So again, welcome to our second TLC Online. My name is Oleg. I'm Vice President for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, for those who don't know me. And I'm going to be your host for the next 3 days. Who would have thought that 1 year after having the first TLC Online 1 year ago, we would be online again in a virtual conference today? There are many pros and cons for having virtual conferences. It gives you greater flexibility, saves time, but I'm personally missing the fun and networking opportunities. However, we worked really hard in order to make sure that we try to incorporate some interaction, some fun into the TLC event these days. I wouldn't call the delay these days a fun in particular, but I hope we will get it back on track and we will make it working for all of us over the next 3 days. This year conference promised to be a good mix of different kinds of activities. We have more than 30 sessions from a leading institution to share best practices, their experience over the last year in particular. We have a good mix of external speakers, keynotes, and we have dedicated developer stream. We also have live captioning in Spanish and well-being sessions. Now, and even though we moved the conference online, it's great to see so many people have made it to join us this time. While we call this TLC Europe, it really has turned to be a global conference. We have more than 1,000 people registered from 44 countries and actually close to 500 institutions across the world. Just to give you an estimate, it's twice more than we had last year. So I think we should probably rename TLC Europe to be a global TLC going forward. And even though the conference is organized by Blackboard, I'm also very pleased about the fact that this event has become a true educational sector conference with a very strong attendance by both Blackboard clients and guests. So thank you so much for joining. And once again, apologies for a previous hiccup with the technology. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, AWS, Microsoft, Explorance, and IntelliBoard. Really appreciate you guys coming on board. We are going to hear from some of them over the next couple of weeks, and I'm really excited about also opening sponsors and exploring some other opportunities and letting you understand what we can also offer from the wider ecosystem. I'm also super excited about the fact that this year we are going to be joined by Dr. Helen Sherman. Those of you who don't know Helen, she's the first British woman astronaut to go to space. And luckily, in May this year, it coincides with the 30th anniversary for Helen Sherman's first flight to space. So we're going to hear from Helen tomorrow. It's going to be very exciting. And also to learn from Helen in the context of education and the way her journey to become an astronaut. We will also have another external speaker, Mr. Charlie Cannon, in the last day in the closing session. Charlie specializes in performing under pressure and personal resilience. And I'm sure probably all of us will need some session and some guidance about how to perform under pressure. It's definitely good. Well, we definitely perform under pressure over the last 30 minutes in order to make it work and then switch to another platform. But I believe over the last year in particular, all of us came across many challenges, and it would be really insightful to learn from Charlie and making sure that we extract some lessons learned. Now, talking about agenda in general, what we're going to see today, and we might need to do some minor adjustments to the agenda, but we have a very packed agenda with a few speakers. Right after my session, I'm gonna hand over to Louise Storm. And most of you probably know Louise. She's been with Blackboard for more than 10 years, and we gathered lots of experience over the last year on how we work with the client, and she's going to share lots of lessons learned, especially what we learned over the last year. Then we have a very close partnership with UNESCO. Blackboard truly believes that we want to offer education for all. And we also partnered with UNESCO Global Coalition last year, where we participated in a number of projects globally in order to offer education truly for all. We had projects going on in Latin America. We are currently working with UNESCO in order to see how we can really offer education in other countries, especially that have challenges with face-to-face across Africa. So I'm really excited to have Carlos Vargas-Tamez joining us in a half an hour. We'll have a wellness breaks. We will then go into learning about current trends and role of technology in the future of education from AWS. We will have a panel discussion with Katy Vieira, our Chief Portfolio and Product Officer, Vice President with Lee Blakemore, and myself, and Bill Bolthouse is going to join us for this session as well, our CEO. And then we will conclude these days with pathway to inclusive learning. We know that accessibility and inclusivity becomes a very hot topic on agenda for most of the institutions and organizations over the last couple of years in particular, with the implementation of new accessibility directive in Europe in particular. So we really want to learn from Derby University, from Nottingham Trent University, and I'm sure you're going to hear lots of interesting and insightful lessons learned. Now, I believe we also try to do something different this year. And we also want to offer you some kind of experience. If you were to come to a face-to-face session, the lunch probably would be on us. And we would also like to use this opportunity to offer a lunch on us for you. So you can enjoy €14, 12 pounds of your meal with Uber Eats. You can use this code. So I would like to ask you to capture this code. We will also present it in sessions later today, and you will be able to use it to order with Uber Eats during the day. So we will share the code every day. And I hope you enjoy your lunch. Now, last but not least, we also have, we also want to make it very interactive. And the more you participate or attend the session, the more points you can accumulate. You will receive points for chatting to one of the booths in the exhibition hall. You can also earn points for attending the sessions. You can track on the leaderboard who is winning, and of course, the leaders at the end of the conference will win some prizes. So we want this event really to be an open forum, so feel free to ask questions, to engage in conversation with your fellow attendees and share your feedback. And for now, I would really like to invite Louise Storm. Most of you probably know Louise. She's been with Blackboard for about 10 years. She is leading client experience activities across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And now, without further ado, Louise, I would like to invite you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Oleg. Thanks, everyone. I'll just, am I going to share my slides, or is someone else going to do it? Just bear with me. Okay. I will share my slides. Just check that everyone can hear me okay. And
all good, Louise.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Oleg. Okay, so hello, everyone. And it's actually a pleasure to get this conference started. I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about the rapidly changing landscape that we've seen and how that's accelerated the digital education agenda. I'm going to share some of the themes that we've seen regionally and globally and how we at Blackboard have contributed to solutions across those themes. Even for those of us who've been in this space for many years, and as Oleg said, I've been 10 years at Blackboard and 15 years before that in higher education around digital teaching and learning. We can all see that digital teaching and learning is being discussed and explored in ways that we've never seen before. This presents opportunities for institutions to make advances in this area that have previously been harder to achieve. That said, we all also recognise that disruption is not linear, and that we are all exploring how to advance learning in the broader context of uncertainty. The extent of stop and start that we've all seen through this pandemic has really given us an insight into how to approach that. We've seen a lot of interesting articles emerge and a lot of writing around this, particularly about how institutions have approached this. So I've pulled out here 3 examples that you may find interesting. The Council of Europe from within the EU's higher education response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Office for Students in the UK, Gravity Assist, and in EDUCAUSE in the US. All are exploring future opportunities for higher education around digital education. And wherever you're based, all 3 provide really valuable insights in how to advance learning post-pandemic, and I commend all of them to you to review, as I say, regardless of where you are in the world. At the launch of the Council of Europe report, the Ireland's Minister of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, an even longer job title than mine, Simon Harris, echoed the sentiments of many when he said our higher education institutions, our learners and staff have risen to the challenges represented by the COVID-19 pandemic with grace and resilience. We've dealt with problems, but we've also found new ways of doing things, and that's the change I want to see embedded as we recover. I don't want to see us going back to the same old. We know better and we will do better as a result, not only as an educational ecosystem, but as a society. And I'm sure you can appreciate that's a lofty ambition for everyone, but also a discourse in a realm that we haven't previously seen. The UK Office for Students Gravity Assist report reflects the scale of the change, calling out that 58% of the students and 47% of the teaching staff that they polled had no experience of digital teaching and learning before the pandemic, but that by 2020, 92% of students surveyed were learning fully or mostly online. I know we all feel that every day, but just the scale of that, from half of those people having no experience to almost everyone doing it, is really quite significant. The EDUCAUSE review article only came out last week, so if you haven't seen that yet, talks about the impact for faculty, for students, for institutional leaders and for IT. And for institutional leaders, it's interesting to see that 70% called out the need to invest more in training opportunities for academic staff to improve online teaching skills, and 36% of them are invested in more sophisticated online course design. At Blackboard and in our Blackboard Academy provision, let me just flick slides there, we saw great participation in 2020 with over 13,000 educators engaging at least one course within Blackboard Academy and almost 25,000 hours of free professional development to support the ramp up. In 2021, we see lots of institutions looking to embed this as part of their core digital capabilities and confidence for their staff. Going back to the UK Office for Students Gravity Assist report for a moment, I thought it was worth just highlighting that they talk about 6 components of successful digital teaching and learning, and it's good to see how those can be addressed. So in terms of the centre of the circle, it's clear to see that digital teaching must start with an appropriately designed pedagogy, curriculum and assessment. Students must have access to the right digital infrastructure, and good access really enables staff and students to build the digital skills necessary to engage. Technology can be harnessed strategically rather than piecemeal or reactive to drive the educational experience and outcomes. Inclusion should be embedded from the start, and all those elements should be underpinned by a consistent strategy. I think all of those things are commendable, all of those things I think we agree with. It's really understanding how to turn that into a reality. Because they're very bold aspirations that everyone seeks to achieve. So at Blackboard, what we've done is we've looked at those areas and said institutions have responded to the uncertainty by looking at 3 pillars of activity: excellence, expansion, or efficiency. And what we see is institutions are typically prioritising one of these whilst acknowledging all 3. Our conversations with institutions look at what they've been trying to achieve and how Blackboard can support them with that agenda. So let's talk about each one. So what we mean in terms of excellence is academic quality. These conversations are primarily focused on developing high-quality, well-designed courses that harness the appropriate pedagogy, curriculum and assessment for fully online, hybrid and blended courses, as reflected in the Office for Students report. And the work of our course design and development team has really been key in that area. We've seen lots of follow-the-sun work to rapidly deploy fully online courses, with design and development work taking place in the Americas and in Africa, and QA taking place in Europe and Australia to help institutions move quickly through that process. And that these courses are facilitated by highly capable and digitally confident educators, as we've seen through Blackboard Academy, and that the course design and curriculum design is informed by learning data and impact metrics, very much more aligned to let's make sure we understand the impact of different activities to address those requirements and needs. The expansion theme really talks about extending the reach of the institution into new markets and acquiring new revenue streams, often to help to compensate for lost on-campus revenue that's been experienced. So what is it that's possible for that institution to achieve? The particular trend that we've seen has been the rapid expansion of online non-credit bearing provision in particular, and short courses. These reflect the growth in outside of higher education, where we've seen lots of online courses in 2020. I'm sure we all have, whether that be health and fitness, skills development, knowledge development, really the democratization of MOOCs, so MOOCs in terms of supply as well as demand, and also a widening access agenda as pathways to formal provision. Blackboard's Training and Development Manager, or TDM, assists with offering a suite as well as vocational educational initiatives. For some institutions, what's been interesting for us is that the transition from credit to non-credit bearing, from 12 to 13-week courses to only 2 to 4-week courses, has been more of a curriculum design challenge than they anticipated. So integrating micro-learning and micro-credentialing into course design is essential to success in this area, and quickly getting your head around that and understanding what that design means has really been critical in what we've been working on. With regard to efficiency, so finally, typically doing more with less. So again, the financial challenges and constraints that the pandemic have presented, and looking to save money and to improve the processes, or sweating the institutional assets, so getting the systems to work harder. An interesting element of this, and I'll be interested in whether the audience are feeling this, but there's a greater appreciation of the mission critical role of the learning platform and the importance of the system to maintain educational continuity. So we've seen a rise in interest in the professional development of system administrators and recognition of their expertise through certification. We've seen institutions undertake system management process reviews as they seek to address the challenges that were baked into processes years ago when the VLE was introduced, that now need to be changed if they're going to move to the next level. I know from personal experience that some of the decisions made in the early 2000s were good enough for the time being, but really need significant rethink to move to this next level in order to be able to optimize the platform and get it to work harder for the institution. One of the interesting observations that emerged out of the EDUCAURS Review Top IT Issues of 2021 was that institutions would likely take a different approach to how they address those themes, depending upon their context and their appetite for change. So here's the model. So for some institutions, the imperative was to restore, effectively to figure out how to get back to the pre-pandemic state. Not in terms of going back to exactly what life was like then, but to stabilize the financial position, to stabilize reputation, to increase the internal quality confidence to the same level that they had for face-to-face provision. For most, the intent is bolder than that, to evolve, to reflect on the sentiment of Ireland's Simon Harris, to learn from 2020. Ideally, to keep the best of what's changed, to learn from it, to learn the mistakes that also were encountered, and to build a new future. So that really, I think, is the trend that we see for the majority of institutions, is how do we move forward and progress from there. And finally, there are some institutions that are emerging out of the pandemic and seeing this as a catalyst for true change, redefining their institution. We have clients that are moving from traditional campus-based to fully online, which is a very extreme transformation. But lots of institutions are looking at their practice to do something significant, particularly around assessment, around student support, around provision, and investing in bold, sustainable digital transformation strategies. So what we did at Blackboard was we looked at this and we looked at the themes and we considered the different appetites for change, and we put together a model that looked at how we could support the activity for institutions in each of those areas. So for an institution that was looking to promote excellence in academic quality, the different sorts of activities that we can do and work in partnership with the institution, depending upon whether they want to restore, evolve or transform. And similarly for expansion and similarly for efficiency. So these will be the focus of the Blackboard's Client Experience Organisation, the team that I lead within the region for 2021. And we'll be looking at a combination of activities that can help institutions depending upon where they see themselves in the matrix of this model. So I hope that this session has planted some seeds for you of questions that you might want to explore within TLC and beyond, that you'll look out for these themes and approaches as you attend the sessions. We definitely have some speakers that are going to be speaking to some of the things that I've outlined here, and that you'll also reflect on your own appetite for change and your institution's appetite for change and how that influences how you advance learning. So thank you very much. Hopefully that's set the scene and got us started underway for TLC 2021. And at this point in the agenda, I'd like to welcome Carlos Vargas-Tamez to the stage. Carlos is the chief of the Teacher Development Unit, let me get the words correct, at UNESCO's Regional Office for Education. He's a sociologist in education that specialises in global education policy. His research and publications focus on the relationship between education, human rights and well-being, and he has worked with universities, civil society, international organisations and local governments in Latin America and Europe, both implementing lifelong learning policies and analysing their intersection with equity, inclusion and social justice. Carlos will speak to us today about the transformation of the teaching profession, lessons learned from COVID-19. And there'll be time at the end for Q&A afterwards. So if you do have some questions, please put them in the chat and I will work through and facilitate those questions for Carlos at the end. So at this stage, without further ado, Carlos, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Louise. And thank you very much for this invitation. Just a little clarification. I work at UNESCO's headquarters, so leading the work on teacher development and the Secretariat of the International Taskforce on Teachers for Education 2030. It is a pleasure to be here, and please allow me to begin my presentation by expressing my gratitude to Blackboard for this invitation to the Teaching and Learning Conference in Europe, Advancing Learning for a Better Future. And also to thank Blackboard as well for being an active member of UNESCO's Global Education Coalition and its Global Teacher Campus. We have embarked together on an adventure for the professionalization of teachers in the Caribbean, and we're working together in Africa and other regions. So thank you for the invitation. In my presentation, I would like to highlight the work that teachers have done during the pandemic to sustain learning despite school closures, and the changes in education formats and calendars that resulted from the COVID-19 crisis. From this, I would like to draw some lessons as to how education has been transformed and the implications that this has on teachers. Now, teachers and education staff have played a key role in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and have faced numerous emerging demands during the social and sanitary crisis. Most teachers have not only to adapt, to replan their educational processes. This has included adjusting methods, curricula, designing new materials, diversifying the media, the format, the platforms that have been used to sustain teaching, but they have also had to take part in activities to safeguard the material safety of learners and their families, including socio-emotional and psychological support that they have had to provide, in view also of some of the phenomena that we saw arising from the pandemic, from the confinement, from the lockdown, and that had to do with, for example, domestic violence, with changes in the mood and the depression on family members of learners themselves. So we saw new demands like providing socio-emotional and psychological support, which was something that teachers didn't exactly do on their day-to-day basis, and which has been augmented to their chores during the pandemic. Now, in performing their teaching activities and in meeting these new demands, teachers often find themselves with inadequate training and resources to address the challenges of adapting teaching content and formats to learners, and particularly to those in disadvantaged situations. Now, even before the pandemic, teachers had few opportunities for training on inclusion or for working with the students in less favored and more diverse contexts. So this is where students risk being left behind or disengaging from education or not coming back after school closures. So this is certainly one of the needs that was revealed from teachers during the pandemic, along with ICT training, which I will come back in a minute. Now, what we saw in 2020 is that the past year was full of challenges, but also of lessons that we have learned to secure and improve teaching and learning. Now, I think it is now timely to reflect on the changes that education has undergone, how they have affected teachers, and how we can best harness the teaching profession. As you probably know, global school closures affected around 63 million primary and secondary teachers in all continents. Teachers have been and remain on the front lines of the response to ensure that learning continues. They have had to rapidly innovate their approaches to teaching in order to facilitate quality distance learning for students, with or without the use of digital technologies. They also played a key role in communicating measures that prevent the spread of the virus and in supporting learners and their families' social-emotional well-being. So in many cases, the role of teachers in providing and in disseminating information around the pandemic was actually a life or death matter. So in terms of teaching and life-saving, the correct dissemination, display, information on how to take care of oneself and others, on the precautions that are needed during the pandemic were vital, and teachers played an important role in it. Now, as part of monitoring the national responses to the COVID-19, UNESCO, together with UNICEF and the World Bank, initiated a survey, which has had 3 iterations, to ask national governments to see how they responded to support education. And one of the sections of this joint survey asks teachers across income groups to see what kind of support they receive. Now, I'd like to share some of the results with you to say that the majority of teachers, around 66%, the majority of countries, around 66% of them, reported that their teachers receive instruction on how to operate and deliver their lessons through remote learning. This included ICTs, but also for lower income countries, included remote and distance education, among others. Now, the same survey showed that just a few countries offered special training, which generally consisted of strengthening ICT skills and innovating pedagogical approaches to delivering learning content. And in countries that already had online platforms established, teachers received training on these platforms, which were repurposed for distance learning during school closures. So it was basically an adaptation of pre-existing platforms that were used as an aid, as an assistance to teaching, which now became the mainstream. Now, however, only 1 in 3 countries reported providing their teachers with ICT tools and free internet connectivity or other related technologies and access that is needed to facilitate their work during the school closures. We know the digital divide is large, and we know that along with the digitization and the uptake of education and training in digital platforms, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of connectivity and sometimes in terms of infrastructure. Now, in terms of psychosocial and emotional support, this is another measure that was provided to teachers, complementing the more technical support given to them. In some cases, social media groups facilitated peer support and the exchange of practices between teachers. And I think this is something that we need to reflect upon. The fact that that connectivity, that ICT tools, that different formats allow for the continuity of the relational, of the social, of the collective dimension of teaching, which is often not taken into consideration in instructional design when we look at the different platforms and the online training that happens. It is not so much as creating these spaces where teachers can actually meet to support one another and to exchange some of their practices and to challenge, to share what are some of the challenges ahead. Now, these changes and the need to adjust to distance education has also created responsibilities and demands that enormously increase the time that teachers spend preparing classes, ensuring suitable connections and following up on their learners in various formats. Now, these new formats require trained and empowered teachers who are able to make pedagogical decisions based on the curricular guidelines in each country and the conditions and circumstances of their students. Now, this is not new. I mean, this is part of what teacher training has always been about, or what we would like to see it being about. It is about judgment. It's about pedagogical decision making. It is about adapting the practice to the needs of learners. But this is perhaps more difficult when we lose that face-to-face dimension, where we can actually tell what the needs of learners are, and we can actually read how learning content is actually being taken up. And while new materials and resources have been made available on different platforms during the pandemic, teaching staff still need time and guidance to explore them, to understand them, and to have the right information to make decisions about their use. So in this respect, this kind of pedagogical use of technologies, of ICTs, to actually aid in the decision making, in the pedagogical judgment of teachers, is something that has become increasingly important. In teaching, the use of virtual systems creates also a risk of losing the links formed during face-to-face lessons, and can generate tensions owing to screen overexposure of teachers and students, or difficulties in maintaining teacher-learner relationships and mediation. This is especially true in the initial education levels, particularly, for example, in preschool and the first years of primary education, when there has to be coordination not only with learners, but of course with parents or caregivers to support and mediate children's learning processes. So this is also an important part to consider. Now, despite these challenges, the COVID-19 crisis was an opportunity for creativity and innovation in educational technology, in teaching and learning, and this must be capitalized. 1 year into the crisis, the Global Education Coalition launched by UNESCO at the outset of the pandemic, mobilized numerous partners, many of them from the tech industry, like Blackboard, to provide teacher training and other valuable resources in order to help support the actors of the education system to face the COVID-19 crisis. As the schools reopen, it is critical for teachers to be able to use blended pedagogies to deliver hybrid education, to personalize teaching in order to address the challenges that we have made, to remediate learning losses, to re-signify education as part of not only the learning but the life pathways of students in all settings and in all contexts, to allow them to benefit from these different learning pathways. So from formal, non-formal, and informal learning. I think it is important also to consider that even though there's a lot of talk about learning losses and the need that teachers, the need for support so that teachers might be able to level learning, to teach at the right level, and to bring learners to speed from the learning that has been lost during the pandemic. I think it's also important to say that learning has been gained during the pandemic as well, and that this learning needs to be leveraged. And here I'm talking about the different roles and the different activities that learners undertook while in confinement, while the school closures, new responsibilities, new forms of learning as well, that I think should be leveraged. Now, in terms of the support that teachers and school principals and other education personnel need for professional development, I think it is important to mention the need, again, of sustaining by means of technology, by means of other non-traditional formats, the communities of practice, the communities to exchange that they have lacked during the closures. You know, the development of programs and professional associations, of networks that can support their preparation, their continuous professional learning, and ultimately their performance. Now, the prevailing COVID-19 crisis underscores the need for teachers to be equipped with pedagogical knowledge and skills, to be able to use combinations of traditional, low, high, online, offline learning pathways for quality learning and for quality outcomes. Today, more than ever before, teachers are required to use a range of educational technologies, and education technology providers can help strengthen the capacity of teachers and promote their continuous professional development. During the COVID-19 crisis, across all corners of the globe, reports abounded of teachers innovating and adapting to continue with teaching. We heard examples of teachers creating videos to support online instruction, preparing take-home packages for students living in no-tech or in low-tech environments, teachers checking in on students on their well-being via social media, WhatsApp, and other messaging services, and going out of their way to reach learners in remote and rural areas despite challenging circumstances. Now, such examples were frequently highlighted in traditional and social media and often repeated in the many online webinars that grew exponentially in the first wave of the pandemic from the immediate need to share knowledge and experiences. Now, what we have done at UNESCO through a mix of surveys, focus groups, outcomes of discussions of the plethora of webinars that were organized last year is to explore examples of teacher innovation of their leadership. Especially, we did that during World Teachers Day in October last year, and some common lessons we learned from teacher innovations that I can share with you. First of all, we found that teacher-led initiatives tended to be directed towards reaching vulnerable populations and marginalized learners, such as girls, students living in remote or rural areas, and students living in disadvantaged contexts with learning disabilities, those needing extra learning support during normal times. We also found that teachers breached the information gap between district or national directives and the local context. In the early phases of the pandemic, health and safety information was either absent, conflicting, or confusing. Teachers worked to fill the information gap, often translating guidance from the central government into local languages and delivering that in the different means of education. Now, in addition to ensuring the continuity of learners, teachers also were engaged in efforts to protect and support the students' and families' psychosocial and socio-emotional well-being. Teachers established lines of communication to check on students' learning progress and how they were coping. They offer advice to parents on time management and how to balance household needs with the time needed for education. They built networks for psychological support and sharing best practices, and used virtual networks for peer-to-peer learning to share best practices and discuss new technological approaches. Now, all of these innovations speak of the importance of the work of teachers to recover from the global pandemic, and they attest to their talent and their creativity. In order to foster teacher innovation, education systems need to make room for the participation of teachers and incentivize their agency and their autonomy. Sometimes accountability regimes constrain the creativity and freedom that teachers have to thrive. Instead of looking at what we've seen in the pandemic, how teachers have experimented, how they have created new forms, new ways, new formats to deliver education, we see within school governance certain trends that, rather than fostering, actually constrain the creativity and freedom of teachers. These accountability regimes, for example, have to do with the school directives, with the prescribed curriculum, with inspection, with teaching standards, with standard testing, all of which actually shape and sometimes force the work of teachers to go on a certain pathway and not to divert and to innovate in different ways and in different directions. That is perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing education systems today. On the one hand, creating channels for the participation of teachers and their organizations in educational decision-making, both at the classroom but beyond, while on the other, promoting and exchanging the knowledge that is produced in pedagogical practice, in the classrooms, in communities of practice, and in pedagogical action. For education systems to become more resilient, we must learn from the many lessons that teachers can provide today. And well, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carlos. That was really interesting. Thank you. We do have one question in the chat. It may be a little bit of an unfair question because you are focusing on teachers. But Dan asks about learners. So you made a comment about learners being required to be more responsible. His question is, but were they? A key skill for adults, but did the younger learners have the metacognitive skills to address that? So teachers were ready. In your experience and in the teachers that you worked with, were their learners ready for that experience too?
Thank you, Louise. I think that's a very good question. The fact that most educational processes have been framed by what I just referred to as accountability regimes also means that the students have a particular role to play. And within this very central, very directive education processes that are based, again, on standards, on evaluation and standard testing, I think learners are also conceived in a way as the ones that follow the teaching, the directive. So So in terms of autonomy, it is true that beyond the autonomy that teachers need to actually adapt their practice, this autonomy itself would actually result in more autonomy for learners. For example, right now and throughout the pandemic, we realized that the students like self-motivated, self-paced, autonomous learning is something that was lacking because it was not part of everyday class, of everyday instruction. So the way, for example, of problem solving, the way of addressing different issues, looking for different sources of information beyond what's direct in a traditional class is something that was lacking from learners. So indeed, I think that the issue of the autonomy and agency that teachers can have to transform the classroom and to transform teacher would definitely need to result in more autonomy and more freedom also from learners to actually pace, choose, and plan their own learning as well, which is not a competency that we've seen often.
Yeah, agreed. And what we see then is that the students do take their lead from the way the teachers behave. So if teachers expect autonomy, they're autonomous. If they don't expect autonomy, then they're not. I fully appreciate that. Okay, so I think we're at time. Carlos, thank you so much for that interesting presentation. Thank you for taking time to come and speak to us at TLC Europe today. For everyone that's joining, join me in thanking Carlos in his session. We're now going to take a 20-minute wellness break. And for those of us that had technical issues at the start, we definitely need a wellness break. You're welcome to use this time to visit the Expo Hub or the Blackboard Technology Zone, or perhaps step by the Wellness Stop. There's a Wellness Stop sponsored by AWS, where you can do some 15-minute chair yoga, some breathing exercises, some stretching. For those of you who prefer to power through at this early stage and don't need that wellness break, there's a sponsor lightning talk with IntelliBoard. So details of that session and access to that are in the program section of the platform. And we look forward to seeing you all back in 20 minutes. And Carlos, again, thank you so much for your session. Thanks,
everyone. Thank you, Louise. Thank you very much.